Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Talmud Chabura, studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Today, the 9th of Elul, September 5th. We are currently studying Masechet Shabbos, chapter 19, Rabbi Eliezer Demila, Kuf, Lamed, Beis, Amud Beis, I believe, 132b. We've been in a multi-day stretch, probing, discussing initially bris, but now comparing and originally we were discussing the permissibility of doing a bris on Shabbos, how bris is like a Shabbos. Now, of course, the Torah, like everything in life, nothing is in a vacuum, nothing is in isolation. Context and the style and the meaning of the words is informed by, or our understanding of the context and the meaning, and the halacha is informed by a number of factors, including other areas in the Torah where there are similar expressions. And so we've been on a multi-day journey comparing and contrasting the psukim that describe Mila with psukim that describe Shabbos and psukim that describe other mitzvahs. And from that context and through that context, we've been able to already probe, explore the flexibility, and also which mitzvah pushes forth the other. That's been the main question. You have a bris, you got to do a bris. You have Shabbos, you can't do bris. Which one overpowers which? And of course, we know bris, bismanai overpowers Shabbos. You could do a bris on Shabbos. Then we had questions, what about a late bris, an early bris, many other issues. And now we are on what might sound superficially as a secondary issue, but the Gemara gives it the full treatment, which is the question of the priority of Mila versus Sara'as. So again, this is already our third day that we're going to be touching upon this. Hopefully today we'll close out the discussion and move on to the next phase. But the point is, you have the Baheres, you have something that could be Saras, is Saras, and it's in the place where a circumcision is meant to happen. And so which one takes priority? And of course, we know it is the circumcision, the bris, that pushes aside Saras, and therefore, if the removal of the Arla entails removing a Negat Saras, so be it. Of course, we also will continue to probe additional facets and factors in this discussion. Before I share the screen and
Rabbi,
yes, Professor.
What is interesting about this discussion, where they are comparing one mitzvah to another mitzvah, lulav, strog, sukkah, milah, and so on. What is absent in this discussion is illustrations, like this rabbi, or in this case, they decided to go ahead with milah, but somebody said that another rabbi said, no, it's not good. That is like the last example of real life applications was about the knife that was brought to circumcision over the roofs, and somebody did it, somebody didn't approve it. But after that, all those cases disappeared. And I wonder whether does it indicate that the rabbis didn't really look at this discussion as anything practical, but just theoretical, or it's just like something that has never happened, like a tzara on a newly born child.
So I love the question. It's a good question, but I'm going to tell you what comes to mind. So again, the professor is observing that unlike in other areas, we brought a lot of case studies, we brought events that happened on the ground. This discussion is at this point entirely theoretical, meaning it's entirely analyzing the psukim, analyzing other psukim, comparing, contrasting, unlike previous discussions where we brought that there were actually different opinions among Chazal. And I'll explain to you what my instinctive sense is. And I like the question because it's always good to think, even if the answer is present too. And I think the answer is because here it's a little different. Here we know the halacha l'maaseh. Practically, we understand that Shabbos overpowers circumcision. In other words, you will do a bris on 8 days on Shabbos. What we don't know is the exact place in the pasuk. We now are kind of reverse engineering. We know the halacha, we know it comes from the psukim that we have in tradition, but now we're gaming it out. We're thinking it through to see exactly how we went from the verse to the halacha. And so, whereas sometimes the machloket is in the realm of practice, here the debate is more on a theoretical level, and therefore all we can do is lay forth the different, I guess we'll use the word theoretical, or the different ways of reading the psukim, the ways of understanding the mitzvahs. So I believe that's why in this specific genre, meaning this is a format of analysis, we are not bringing maisa, we're not bringing action, because we are still in the abstract, where even if we all agree, we might agree on paper, or we might agree in practice, but we're disagreeing in the machshava and in the thought process and in the development of where this came from the Torah to Maisa. And it is, in a sense, interesting that we have the bottom line, but we are not certain exactly the source. And I mentioned this idea in passing because I know it might bother some of us, but I'm glad you asked that question, which really allows us to highlight this distinction, and it makes this Gemara different than many other places in the Gemara, where again the facts, the halacha is somewhat known, but the derech, how we got from the verse to our practice, was either forgotten or not specified. And now the Chazal, the rabbis, are clarifying. I shouldn't say it was forgotten. It could be that there were divergent traditions in how we got to the bottom line, but the bottom line, there was a consensus. And that's what's unique at this point in this Gemara. And thank you for asking. Was that good? Did that clarify? Okay, hold on, you're muted still.
I still would love to see an example of the case where indeed a newly born child had tzara, and what they decided to do.
I understand. Your question is, was there ever an action? I did not. Okay. Was there ever actually an episode where a baby was born and there was a potential leprous spot, or even an adult, and they actually circumcised or actually didn't circumcise? That is interesting. Let's keep our...
I mean that it wouldn't be surprised if there was no such case. Like again, they said about Yov that actually never existed.
And actually in this week's parsha,
it maybe this is also never existed and just for our education.
Interesting. And actually this week's parsha, we have another example of a mitzvah that the Gemara says, that it never actually transpired. And I'm talking about this, the mitzvah of the rebellious son, which also is the Gemara describes that it was a theoretical potential mitzvah, but never actually came to pass. And the intricacies of the administration of the punishment and the consequence of the Ben Saramur were such that it was implausible that there would ever actually be a person that hit all of the criteria: specific age, specific practices, specific physical features of the parents and the child, and the parents had to be on board, etc. Actually, I should qualify what I said. The Gemara does say that Avshalom may have been a Ben Saramur. The protocols of the consequence of the Ben Saramur never were carried out. It doesn't mean that there wasn't a child that may have fit into the status of a rebellious child, but there was never a rebellious child killed under that protocol and that met that criteria. So indeed an interesting question, and I don't have the answer, but let's keep our eyes out. Let's see if there are any clues to if it did or ever did not ever happen. I would like, before we share the screen and get started, I just want to, in brief, I know I gave you the heads up on Friday, but Baruch Hashem, we began reading the new Old Torah, and it was very a special blessing, and at least to me, it embodied kind of the Jewish spirit of, sometimes we think we're down, but we're not out. And so, sometimes we discount ourselves, we discount others, we discount the future of the Jewish people. So I think a Torah that on one hand came before the Holocaust and was dedicated to honor the Holocaust and was almost lost, if you will, from circulation and was brought back, I felt was a very beautiful and symbolic moment. And so I just wanted to share that with you as I find the screen, and we'll start the Gemara as well. So here we are. Bear with me another moment. All right. So just to remind you really briefly, we had a brisa, and the brisa was a rabbi of the Mishnah, a Tana, thinking out loud. Which one is stronger, Shabbos or Mila? Mila, no, maybe Shabbos, no, maybe Mila, and then we brought a pasuk. And the Gemara wants to know what was behind the scenes, what was really going on in his mind. Now, I just want to just clarify. Mishnah is the highly edited text that preserves the oral tradition in shorthand upon which the Gemara is based. But the Mishnah that we have is not the totality of the intellectual and Torah output of the sages of that era. It was just a highly edited and perfected text that maximized or was optimized to facilitate recall by memory of the essential aspects of halacha. However, additional teachings of those sages were also preserved. They were preserved in other works, including what's called the Braita, the non-selected teachings from that era, which tend to be a little bit more elaborate than the Mishnah. And so many times we will bring a brisa. Again, the Mishnah was intentionally concise so that it could be recorded by memory, but many times we'll bring the brisa. The brisa gives more information than the Mishnah. However, the brisa too, relative to the Talmud, is relatively shorthand. And so in this instance, we have a shorthand recap that the rabbi gives of his back and forth in his mind, or to his students' mind, his uncertainty about Saras. And so the Gemara games out and gives a proposed explanation. Just to remind you, the explanation was there is a logical pathway to say that forget Shabbos, that Saras is more strict than Mila, but there was an equally plausible case that Mila was more strong, more chamor, more of a dominant force in the halachic, in the hierarchy of mitzvahs than Mila, and therefore we needed a pasuk to weigh in on one way over the other. This is the outline of the Gemara that we saw on Friday. The Gemara then presented a second way of understanding it. The second way of understanding it had to do with, hold on, I just want to find the place. Okay, no, I'm far behind. Hold on, let me just find the place and I'll continue giving you the fast recap. So basically we had two takes to understand why the thought process of the rabbi in the Bryce.
Rabbi.
Hold on, 1 second. The second format had to do with asay lined up against a lot asay, a negative and a positive. Which one usually pushes aside the other? So we said that a positive will push aside a negative, but here really it was a positive and a negative, and therefore we needed the verse. So two different mahauchim, two different processes to consider which is stronger, necessitating an extra word basar to tell us that the bris pushes aside circumcision. We then itemized the on-time bris, an adult bris, and a middle bris, and ultimately in the end we said that all three of them push aside saras. This is where we're up to now, and today we're going to continue probing a little more the difference between how Rava understands that we could prove with logic that bris pushes aside tzaras, or if we need psukim. That's where we're up to. That's our placeholder. Beryl, go ahead.
So if I understand what's going on, everybody agrees that we do the bris on Shabbos, and all these discussions or arguments are only what it's based on, or someone is taking the position that we shouldn't do the bris on Shabbos.
Right now we're discussing the theory behind, less than the actual practice. In other words, we all agree that a bris pushes aside Shabbos. We all agree saras pushes aside a bris pushes aside saras. The discussion here is the theory behind it. How do we know? Is it a pasuk? Is it a kal v'chomer? Is it both? Is it neither? That's the discussion. Okay. Rebel, did I answer the question? I just want
Right. Yeah.
Okay, shkach. At this point, we will get back to practical disagreements in a moment. Right now, we are a disagreement in theory. Let's go back. We read these lines, but let's read it again. And again, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of a mental workout. Be'ezer Hashem. Remember, we had a baby child, an adult child, and we had a middle-aged child, not an adult, and not 8 days old. Rava says, Rebel, just look at the format of how much of the screen is shared. Is this what you were? Is this?
Yes, it's fine. I have the whole paragraph.
So the reason why sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't is the longer the Gemara groups the paragraph, the more or less of the translation is available. The other thing I just want to remind you is that I read it in the Hebrew. There are occasions where my explanation or might differ slightly with the Steinsaltz translation, and this affords us an opportunity to sometimes consider why there might be more than one way to translate the Gemara, which hopefully doesn't confuse us. Hopefully it leaves us more enlightened. Hopefully. Rava explains. Mila bizmana doicha, the fact that a timely bris, an 8-day-old bris, pushes aside leprosy, loy tzricha kra. We should not need a verse to prove this. Mikal v'chomer asya, with logic alone, the 40 yori, with assessing the strength of the logic, by assessing the halachic and conceptual strength of bris over leprosy, we can infer with logic, and we don't need a verse. Why? My Shabbos dichamira doiche. Shabbos is super strict. It's a very strict mitzvah. Among all the mitzvahs of the Torah, Shabbos is incredibly significant. Consequences are incredibly steep. There's a great Torah obsession. Maybe obsession sounds like a negative. There's a great Torah involvement and concern about Shabbos. And if even Shabbos doesn't stand in the face of timely bris, sara'as, you think a little leprosy would hold back a bris from happening? Of course not. The bris plows ahead, unhindered by sara'as. This is the logical understanding of Rava. Now, this sounds familiar because we saw this in the proposed thought process of the Brisa. Now Rava is saying it with a straight face, with serious. Rava doesn't get pushback, but that's what Rava is saying. Dr. Hammer?
A general question about Kal v'chomer, but here specifically. There's some thought in my mind that we learn when we're talking about mishpatim and chukim, and the importance of any one mitzvah is unknown.
Yes.
And therefore,
yes.
When someone says, well, I don't do that because
I was waiting for someone to bring this up.
We somehow we are taught that everything is important, period. So
yes,
how do you get from that to saying, well, this is the important category? It's like what you eat at home is important. What you eat outside isn't important. What you do on Shabbos is important. What you do on Yom Tov isn't. Where does it come, this hierarchy, and giving us the right to use that as the basis for other decisions?
So, Doctor, I want to tell you, since we started this Gemara, I was waiting for someone to ask this question. The Pirkei Avos says that you shouldn't be Yoshev Shoikel. You shouldn't sit and assess the importance of one mitzvah over another, because, of course, every mitzvah is important, and you cannot consider this mitzvah as an important mitzvah, this mitzvah is a less important mitzvah. And all of a sudden here, the Gemara is seemingly making the case that one mitzvah is more important than the other. So if you remember correctly, the exact language of Pirkei Avos, which I don't have the exact language, we talk about the schar of a mitzvah. a person shouldn't assess that this mitzvah has greater schar, therefore I'll do it. This mitzvah has less schar, or an avera, this is a more slight avera. There's lesser consequences or greater consequences. And that is inappropriate from the Jewish Torah perspective, because if Hashem gave us a mitzvah, it's important. And in a sense, we value the totality of our relationship more than the specific perks or consequences of a mitzvah and avera. Because every mitzvah and every avera may have a Torah prescribed consequence. But the bigger picture is that these are ways to show our connection and our allegiance to Hashem. However, by the very nature of living on planet Earth, we do have to make. I'm sorry?
I have a question.
Hold on.
Oh,
we
okay,
do have to occasionally have a conflict, a scheduling conflict, or a reality conflict. And so then we need to determine which prevails over the other. So for example, I mentioned this on Friday. We have a mitzvah to make the clothing of a kohen. But the Torah also says that you shouldn't mix wool and linen. So which is stronger? Obviously, over there, the Torah explicitly tells us to make the clothing. The Torah obviously understands that there's a law of shatnez, and the Torah is telling us without saying that we're not concerned about the laws of shatnez. That's more clear. Then sometimes there are times that it's a little less clear, because you don't always have a baharis on the foreskin, on the arla. But if it should so happen, now you need to know which one takes priority. And so therefore we could try to infer chumrah, how intensely powerful by different factors a mitzvah is, to understand and to determine if it might push aside another mitzvah. But not everybody is comfortable with this formula, possibly for the very reason, Dr. Hammer, that you're making, and also because there isn't only one lens to view the value. Value is the wrong word, but the strictness of a mitzvah. On one hand, we know Shabbos is strict because it's very severe, it's very restricting. The Torah is very into it.
When we make brachas over food, we have also precedence of one bracha coming before the other.
Right, but that's usually based on chashivos.
Well,
But Dr. Hammer is rightfully asking, since when do we want to describe one mitzvah as more chashiv and one mitzvah as less chashiv?
that's what I'm saying though, but it is chashiva. So,
But there is some formula of greater weight, but we should use that information only when there's a mitzvah to mitzvah conflict and we need to decide in the realm of halacha, but not, I'm going to reject a mitzvah. Now there's actually something else. There are times there's a mitzvah that is a passing mitzvah that you might miss out, and there's a mitzvah that you can come back to later. Like, for example, there's a question. Talmud Torah is very important. Do you interrupt Talmud Torah for another mitzvah? And some mitzvahs, yes. Sometimes, yes. Is there somebody else available? And so life by the very nature of life and existence, there are going to be conflicts. And apparently the Gemara is not afraid to consider then chumrah, stringency, chashivos. Where we don't want this thought process to be imposed is, again, one person not in conflict. The conflict is between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Tov wants us to do the mitzvah, the Yetzer Hara wants us not. So we shouldn't use this logic. We shouldn't allow the Yetzer Hara essentially to take this logic, because also you never know when it comes to schar, the power and the weight of one mitzvah to another. And also you don't know the weight for an individual. Just an example, and then we have to go back into the Gemara. You know, there are a lot of different nutrients and vitamins and medicines. Which one is better than the other? Vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D. There are maybe some that, as a general sense, are even more essential for a person's health. But if a person is struggling with a specific deficiency, well, then for that person, they need the specific vitamin that they're missing, even though maybe in the world over, other vitamins are higher on the priority of, so maybe that's how we could give for ourselves a mashal about mitzvahs. There are, in a global scale, some mitzvahs that might, in a sense, take priority. But for an individual, we don't know where the deficiency is. We don't know where the sakar or the contribution of a specific mitzvah might be more essential for our soul. So Alan, where's Alan? This is a little bit of a nod to the. Is Alan on with us? No, he's not on with us. Dr. Hammer will tell us where he is. But
Bye-bye. What happened to my
hold
question?
on. But so I believe that's the case we're making. If a person is missing many different vitamins, or a person needs many different supplements, well, maybe we'll decide, listen, this supplement is absolutely essential. But we shouldn't use those very same logics to avoid, and we don't know, because at least when it comes to mitzvahs, because we never know exactly which mitzvah is most important for us. And this goes to a mystical question that's beyond the scope of our discussion, which is why does the Gemara describe? We had an earlier Gemara that says that some people have specific mitzvahs that talk to them, and that's important for them. Anyways, Ellie, you had a question? Oh no, Dr. Amber, was that? Did I address?
No. First of all, you gave good justification for the development of multiple vitamins, so that's good, But I was thinking about vitamins, and I was thinking about the issue we're talking about, and I was thinking about Chabad. I was thinking about Chabad, what they have to choose in Kiruv, what they do. And it's interesting that the idea of giving Shabbos candles or Chanukiah
Or food packages.
or food pack or putting on tefillin, those are the food packages are a separate category. But I mean, it's very, very common that Chabad is associated with those three things. And it's interesting how and why the decision is made. I think it's a wise decision. It has to do with long-term, short-term, public. But I'm just saying, so all along we have to make decisions about priorities. But
right. So I think if we have to give one sentence, and Dr. Hammer, I'm really grateful for the question. I was waiting for someone to ask it, and I think it is an important thing to consider, that there's a difference between prioritizing proactively and using those same reasons to reject or fail to do a mitzvah. I think that's the difference. When the Pirkei Avos says don't, it means don't use logic to say, oh, this mitzvah is not important, I'm not going to do it. But when you're talking about, and as far as Chabad, I'll tell you I'll give you a multi-tiered comment. First of all, I think you're right. There is a lot of let's just say like this: there are different philosophies of Kiruv. There are different strategies in Kiruv, and there's a lot of discussion in the Kiruv world about what distinguishes one brand or one branch from the other, and of course, to the Rebbe and to Chabad and to anyone that values Torah mitzvahs, all mitzvahs are ultimately in the important. And the hope, of course, is that a Jew will be so taken by Torah mitzvah that they'll desire to become involved in a very holistic way. The Rebbe, what's unique about the Rebbe's attitude, and I know we're going off on a tangent here, is that the Rebbe believed, based on Jewish teachings, that even if a person is not going to become frum, quote unquote, they're not going to take on a mitzvah forever, a single mitzvah by a Jew creates an eternity of blessing, and it's worthwhile to sacrifice, even if the person is not going to become a Baal Teshuvah, or if a person is not going to become frum, to give them a Jewish experience can have a very, very big impact on their life, and it can reverberate throughout all time. It also happens to be that most journeys are triggered by a single moment and a single experience. And so give a person a meaningful, touching experience that allows them to feel connected to their Yiddishkeit will, in the long run, likely plant a seed that will give them a great chance to find greater connection to Yiddishkeit. As opposed to other philosophies, which are not wrong. I think all the different groups ultimately complement each other in serving Klal Yisrael, but others are a lot more strategic in selecting specific individuals that have potential or to become a lifelong learner or a quote unquote frum person. So it's not that Chabad doesn't value those, but I think the Rebbe understood that every Jew is valuable, even if they're not going to become a yeshiva student, and every Jew is valuable, even if they're not going to become a member of a specific. And of course, many people that have those experiences. And one of the proofs of the value of the Rebbe's attitude, which is of course embraced by Chabadniks, is that many people in all different strands and streams of Judaism, Kiruv and not, many people found their first step through a seed planted by a specific mitzvah. So anyways, that's just my thought. Happens to be also the Rebbe was also strategic. It's two ways. It's what the person who's receiving experiences, it's also the person that's going to share it. They have to be motivated. And there was also a spiritual dimension. So the Rebbe many times would connect a specific mitzvah campaign. The Rebbe had many campaigns, and ultimately there were a number of things with specific Jewish current events. So, for example, the Tefillin campaign was started as a way to give chizuk and spiritual support to the Tzahal during the 6-Day War. And so the Rebbe saw a correlation between Jews putting on tefillin and doing it in honor of Jewish protection, and there was a spiritual but also tangible connection, and so on with many of the campaigns. So, anyways, that's a thank you for sparking my tangent over here.
Rabbi.
Yes.
In a sense, this question answers my question of why we are looking for all these sources when we could just decide to have a bris on Shabbos. Is the message that we are not prioritizing mitzvahs. We are finding a source that tells us how to handle the situation.
Oh, very good. Yes. And so, for example, if the Torah adds an extra word, the Torah says, I can't let you make this decision on your own, because you're going to choose one mitzvah or the other. The Torah gives an extra word to positively inform us which one takes priority. Very good. I like that. Now, also, I just want to show. So in a sense, what happened, I gave Dr. Hammer one long answer, which I was thinking about, and I was glad that you asked. But it's clear, Rava says we have a way to know the priority of one over the other. Rav Safra challenges it. Or Rav Safra doesn't say, hey, Rava, how dare you weigh one mitzvah against the other? He makes another rational case that although from one vantage point, from one perspective, this mitzvah is chamer, from another angle, the other mitzvah might be more chamer. And so therefore, it's a futile exercise to try to really assess which mitzvah is stronger. Amar le Rav Safra le Rava. So Rav Safra challenges Rava. Mimai Shabbos chamira. You made the assumption that Shabbos is more strong. How do you know? Dilma tzaras chamira. Maybe tzaras is strong because although Shabbos, well, let's see. Shekain doiches avodah. Tzaras is strong. It pushes aside working in the Beis Hamikdash. The avodah doiches Shabbos, and yet we do avodah on Shabbos. Again, we've seen this before, so it's familiar. So Rava answers no. Hasam lav mishum dechamira tzaras. The reason why tzaras pushes aside avodah is not because of a chumrah of tzaras. El mishum degavrahu deloichazi. The person is temporarily out of commission, but it's personal. It's about him being unqualified, not that avodah gets canceled. Someone says, no, amai v'yakas b'harta v'yaved. If you're telling me that tzaras is actually not pushed aside for avodah, if you're telling me that avodah doesn't push aside tzaras, well, then the person should have the license to chop off his baheres and go to avodah. Someone says, no, mechusar tefillah, even if he'll cut it off, he still can't go to the Beis Hamikdash. He'll still have to go to mikvah, and therefore he set off. Gemara says, Tein ach negoyim tmeim. When do I say that you can't push aside avodah from tzaras? That's if the person was already determined to be leprous. Negoyim tahorim ha'ikal ameimar. But what about a leprous sign that's still pure? Basically, even if it was determined to not be a tzaras, a person generally is still not allowed to cut it off. But if it's tahar, you should be able to cut it off, and it should be pushed. It should overpower avodah, and I guess therefore you should be. Therefore, we don't know which one is stronger, and therefore we cannot use logic. According to Rav Safra tells Rava, we cannot use logic to infer that Mila pushes aside tzaras, because maybe tzaras is even stronger than everything and also stronger than Mila.
By the way, Rabbi,
yes.
Eli never got to ask his question.
Oh, Eli, what was your question? I'm sorry. Thank you.
The question I wanted to ask, is it possible that a newborn baby comes out with full circumcision without even have to do a circumcision?
Yes, I've heard that.
Yes, but that's not really the subject of our Gemara. It's going to be the subject of a later Gemara. So,
Yeah, okay.
So let's hold on to that thought because it's a good one, but it's going to be discussed in 5 or so pages. Elama Ravashi, therefore Ravashi says You know why tsaras? Let's see Rashi. So why do we say that Shabbos is stronger than tsaras? For example, if there is a circumcision on tsaras, inami tzitzis v'kilayim. Similarly, by tzitzis and kilayim also, me'ikar hadin, tzitzis could be wool and linen. The strings, I believe. Debeidna demis aker lav kamoikim asay. Because here, let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz actually. In a case like circumcision, milan tsaras, or putting tzitzis on wool and linen, the negative mitzvah is a positive mitzvah. But in the Beis Hamikdash, the idnam demisaker lelav, in the Beis Hamikdash, the moment you're removing the tsaras, loika moikim asay, that's not a mitzvah. You'll go ahead and do a mitzvah, but that's not the act of a mitzvah. And therefore, you can't really compare leprosy in the Beis Hamikdash versus tsaras and milah. Period. So we have a machlokes, Rava and Rav Safra. If we use logic to prove the weight of milah over leprosy, or if we use a pasuk. That was the machlokes. Forget the last little dialogue, which was trying to probe exactly if you and why you can or cannot compare the interplay of tsaras and the Beis Hamikdash. In truth, this machlokes is a machlokes of Tanoim. If we can use logic, or if we can use only a pasuk. Rashi. There are those who use logic. They use the kal v'chomer to establish that milah is, of course, stronger than tsaras. Kirava, which was Rava's opinion. So why is the pasuk say basar? Lishaloi bizmana, to tell us that even if it's not a timely bris, you still push aside. You do bris, even if it means removing a beheres, a sign of leprosy. V'ika, but there's another Tanoic opinion, Mishnah opinion. Deloi nafkele b'kal v'chomer. We cannot rely on a kal v'chomer. We cannot use reason. V'itztarech lemila bizman, and you'll need a pasuk to establish. You'll need a word in the Torah to establish that a timely bris pushes aside tsaras. Kidas Safra, which is the opinion of Rav Safra. So how would I know shaloi bizman? How would I know a late bris that's under 13? Asya mebinaya. We use the two verses of a timely bris and a bar mitzvah, a post bar mitzvah bris, and we infer that everything in between we also do bris.
I have a question.
So again, hold on.
Okay.
The whole discussion here at this point, at the level of our study, it's all theoretical. I am certain that the Achronim will help find a place where maybe there is a nafka mina l'dina, but at this point, on our superficial but good, wholesome way of learning the Gemara, it's all theoretical. They are so far all agreeing in the halachic application that should a person have a leprous spot on the place of the bris, they would go ahead and do the bris. The question is it based on a word in the Torah, or is it based on a kal v'chomer? And it looks like, at the very least, at this point, everybody agrees. Now, I want to hear Dr. Stalmer's question, but I just want to point out that we're about to view the brisa and see how they actually rely either on a kal v'chomer or on a word in the Torah. Doctor?
So my question is, how can you learn from a milah shelo b'zmana? But a milah shelo b'zmana, there's not docha Shabbos.
But we're not talking, in the context of tsaras right now, we're not really talking about Shabbos. We use a different formula. Basically, there are three types of bris. Bris in the paradigm that we're looking at now. There's a timely bris, a post bar mitzvah bris, and there's everybody in between. Why do we divide it like that? Because there are psukim that talk about a bris on time. There are psukim that talk about a bar mitzvah. And then there are general, neutral psukim that are general. The word basar appears by a timely bris, an on-time bris, and the word basar appears by a bar mitzvah and post bar mitzvah when it talks about punishment. The word basar does not appear in the other psukim. So we have two times basar, but we have three scenarios. The question is, do we say basar is talking about a timely bris? Basar is talking about a late bris. But the sandwich effect, that's not the wording of the Gemara. The Gemara says mibinaya, from both. And the fact that the Torah encompasses both extremes, we infer that everything in between also is like Chetzeras. Alternatively, we use logic to infer that a timely bris, because a timely bris is a bulldozer of a mitzvah. A timely bris pushes everything aside. Therefore, we don't even need a pasuk to tell us that a timely bris pushes aside saras. It's obvious if you believe that saras is more chomer than Shabbos, or at the very least more chomer than avodah, and therefore we can infer that bris pushes it aside. I'm sorry, if you believe that milah is stronger than Shabbos and Shabbos is stronger than saras, because Shabbos pushes aside avodah, saras doesn't. Whatever the logic is, if you could use that logic like Rava does, well, then we'll take that word basar and say this word basar is extra. We don't need it for a timely bris, but we'll use it to project from 9 days until bar mitzvah. So there's different ways of using. Basically, you have 3 classifications. You have 2 times that the Torah uses the word basar. We have 2 different Talmud or Mishnah logic to infer the third. And the machlokes is how do you thread the needle? Which way do you think?
Rabbi, is there any exception to do a milah before 8 days?
No.
Or only has to be after?
No. Well, actually, 99% no. There is one case, but I think we'll see it later, so I don't want to go into it now. But there is one case that there's actually a suffix if the bris is supposed to be done less than 8 days, and for that reason, such a bris would not be done on Shabbos on the 8th day. Actually, I'll tell you the instance. A child that's born a Gentile, and then they convert him. Dr. Hammer, you're requesting control of the screen. Would you like it?
Yeah, I want to make sure I could go up and down. That was my point.
Let's see if it works. I don't think it's going to work, but I've given you control of the screen, so let's see if it works. I'll explain to you why.
Work, but then you lose control.
I don't know if I lost. I did lose control. No, I didn't.
Wait, my question, Rabbi, please.
He's going to make it go up and down.
Well, hold on. I told you already. I'll give you the answer later, but I'll give you the answer now if you want. Oh,
yeah.
Mazel tov. Hold on, but
Yeah.
doctor, you're moving down. You want to probably move up, right?
Yeah, I want to move. Yeah.
So let's
The
see.
thing is that you're controlling it for everybody.
No, but I'm controlling it for everybody. I want to just control it for myself.
Oh, no.
I want to be able to look up.
No, for that to work, you'll have to have your own window of Safari. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. But doctor, this is pretty cool. You can do anything right now. I wonder.
Oh,
This is a lot of power. Hold on. First of all, okay, Ellie, to answer your question, then I want to tell you a 30-second vart that's connected to this. A person that's born a Gentile, and then they convert the child. So there's a possibility that child would get the bris right away. The reason being, because the Torah talks about Isha Kisazri of Yolda Zachar. It talks about certain regulations or halachas about a Jewish mother, and then it says on the 8th day the baby is circumcised. But a Gentile mother doesn't have that pasuk. So if the child is getting a circumcision following or not following the first verse, maybe the bris would happen at day 1 if they're converting, or day 5 or whatever. For that reason, they wouldn't get a bris at 8 days. But other than that specific situation, there is no Jewish child, to my knowledge, that would ever get a circumcision before 8 days. Now, Dr. Hammer, last week's parsha.
No. And what if that baby had a bris in the hospital, that non-Jewish baby?
So that baby also on the 8th day would not get a hatafa. It would be done after the 8th day, because biblically we're not certain that this hatafa, it's not really a biblical procedure. I don't think it's more of a rabbinic procedure.
Rabbi,
Hold on. Dr. Rutenberg from Muncie is in town now. He's making Aliyah actually in a few days, so that's a big milestone. We wish him mazel tov. So he has a weekly email and a shir on the Sfas Emes, and he gave a shir this week. Very interesting. It has to do with Dr. Hammer with your profession, but also what you're doing right now with controlling the screen. So it says that a person who is fearful should not go. A person who sinned and is fearful should not go to battle. They should stay home. So his take is, why is a person fearful? So he says the greatest trauma that a person could have. I don't know if this is true in the field of psychology, but this is what he says. He's not a psychologist, but he says that the greatest trauma is a result of a scenario where one does not have control. The being out of control is one of the greatest So let's say a person that's in a, God forbid, in an accident, the claim is that a passenger who's totally out of control may have a greater degree of trauma than the driver who made a mistake. Whether this is true or not, in fact, I don't know, but it sounds like it might be true. It's on a person, because there's a disassociation between the person and the events, whatever. So he says when a person sins, they're creating some kind of severing. They're creating a fragmentation, an inner fragmenting of themselves from the holiness of the neshama. And so there's a certain trauma inherent of being removed from the driver's seat, removed from the neshama, whatever he said. So I thought of his Dvar Torah as I'm sitting here, but I have no control of the screen. Maybe
Rabbi.
Yes, Doc.
Rabbi,
yes.
could we not think of a scenario where pikuach nefesh you would do the bris the day before?
If there was a pikuach nefesh that was resolved by circumcision, I suppose. Well, that's actually an interesting question. God forbid, there was a tumor on the arla. This would be an interesting question. God forbid there was a tumor on the foreskin, and they're told that you must immediately remove the foreskin, and that way it won't spread to the rest of the body. Again, I don't know.
I was thinking of a more understandable. You're being attacked. They're throwing you out, and before you leave.
It's wartime. It's wartime. They're bombing your city.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't believe you would do an early bris because you're not sure if you'll have access to a bris later. I don't believe that's the case. But God forbid, if there's actually pikuach nefesh, that would be an interesting question. I'm sure you would be allowed to remove it because of express it. Probably the rabbi would say, hold on, could you just remove the tumor without removing the whole foreskin and then remove the whole foreskin? I don't know. That's an interesting question. But anyways, let's do a few more lines of Gemara because we're almost out of time. Oh, doctor, you see, I also have control, so there's no trauma.
But dual control.
You know, they say you can't have two kings sharing one crown, but I guess you could have two people sharing the screen. All right. It's a machlokes of the sages of the Mishnah. The Tanya, there's a brisa that says, Bosar. Torah says you remove bisar arlato, the flesh of the arla. And as we discussed on Friday, it didn't need to say flesh. We would know what arla is. Although there is a spot of saras, yimol, take it off. Torah tells us, this is the words of Rabbi Yishia who reflects the words of Rabbi Safra. Rabbi Yonasan says no. And here he's going to reflect the words of Rava. Who needs the word of a Torah? Who needs the word of a pasuk? Shabbos, chamura, Shabbos, which is so stringent, doiche, and it pushes aside. It is pushed aside for mila, saras, which is less chamur, like kol shekein. Certainly, it should be pushed aside. So here we have a brisa that makes the very same point or points, as Rav Safra and Rava. This, we should note, takes us to page 133, Kuf Lamed Gimel, which Kuf Lamed Gimel is the gematria of Kellogg. Does that have any meaning? No.
Cornflakes.
133.
Kuf Lamed Gimel, right? All right. We are now going to revisit the brisa we quoted that we said is reflective of the opinion of Rava and Rav Safra. You need a pasuk, or you could use a kal v'chomer. And as we study this, we will continue to probe if this is. Why am I blurry all of a sudden? I don't know what's going on with the. Well, anyways,
Here, Rabbi, you have room to show more Steinsaltz a bit by going up a little bit. Thank you.
Hold on.
Okay.
I don't know if I could. I probably couldn't make this even higher.
No, this is fine.
But Beryl, the only downside, I will be honest, of sharing more of the Steinsaltz is then people ask me questions based on the words of Steinsaltz, but I don't know the words of Steinsaltz because I'm learning it from inside, and then I don't know the question. But that's not such a problem. But
then again, he might answer a question. You'll have one less.
Oh, okay, it's fair. It's fair. I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out why. I know why, because I'm shuckling, so I'm making the camera have to zoom in and out, and it's having a hard time. Okay. Amar Mar, let's just quote the brisa we just learned. Basar, apple pisha yesham beheres yimol. The Rabbi Yoshia, we know from the word basar. Yimol basar lasai. Again, we just read this, that you don't care about a beheres, you just cut it off. The Rabbi Yoshia. Then Rabbi Yonason says, Halam alikra, who needs a pasuk? Davar shem miskaven. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're going to read the first two lines. The opinion of Rabbi Yoshia. Basar tells us that you remove the bris even though there is a beheres. Halam alikra, who needs a pasuk? Basic Jewish common sense would dictate you could remove it. Davar she'in miskaven hu. The removal of the beheres is not intentional. All you really have in mind is to do a bris. The davar she'in miskaven mutar, and generally speaking, kavana is the big deal. So you should be allowed to do it because there is no kavana. There's a lot of questions on the statement, but let's see the Gemara first. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, hold up a second. And now we need to go way back in time. As you may recall, throughout our Gemara, we have a reoccurring discussion about the supremacy of kavana or not kavana, and how much weight we give, how much license do we give to do an act if it's einay miskavin. We have Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says, davar shein miskavin aser. Rabbi Shimon says, davar shein miskavin mutar. Abaya says, hold up. Of course, according to Rabbi Shimon, davar shein miskavin is mutar. I don't need a pasuk. Maybe Rav Yoshia was talking based upon the viewpoint of Rabbi Yehuda. That's one answer. Rav Amar, we're going to stop here, but I just want to get a flavor. And then tomorrow we'll pick up with a discussion of kavana and not kavana. Rav Amar, Rava says, Afilu Temer Rabbi Shimon, no. This Gemara might be consistent, even according to the opinion who usually says, no kavana, no problem. You know why? Afilu Temer Rabbi Shimon. Moide Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon has a scenario where he agrees that kavana, no kavana, it's asur. You can't, if the act is so definitely going to lead to the result, we don't care about your kavana. For example, you can't cut off a chicken head and say, oh, I didn't mean for it to die. The chicken's dead. And you can't do that on Shabbos. Well, removing an arla, removing a foreskin that has on it beheres, is psik, reisha v'lo. There's no way you're not going to do a circumcision. There's no way you're not going to cut off the arla and remove the skin malady that's on it. And so even though usually Rabbi Shimon is very, very flexible, very lenient, if there's an absence of kavana, maybe in this case, says Rava, even Rabbi Shimon would need a pasuk to permit this scenario of removing the beheres without a pasuk. Thankfully, a pasuk. Tomorrow we'll continue to see how Abaya and Rava spar a little more around understanding the context or the necessity of Rabbi Yoshia's teaching. And so, as you may have noticed, we are finally taking a slight pivot, not a total pivot. We're still talking about Saras versus Mila, but a different angle, a different take, and a different formula, a different format of analysis. And so, my dear friends, I want to take this moment to thank you all for being here for this Talmud Chabura. I do want to say today is actually a very, very special day for my wife and myself, because today is precisely 10 years since we moved to Florida.
Mazel tov.
Florida on Labor Day 10 years ago. And we took the earliest flight out because Crown Heights, where we were living until then, has the West Indies parade on Labor Day, and the whole Crown Heights is a gridlock. And so we got up early in the morning with our baby Mordechai, and we flew to Florida on Labor Day, Monday, 10 years ago. So I asked Hashem to give koyach, and I want to say, well, my point was that one of the best things that happened in our in my career here in Florida is this Talmud Chabura, which I very, very much appreciate. And so I want to thank everybody here for being a part and making possible one of the highlights of my 10-year Florida experience. So a big Yasher Koyach. And I want to wish and pray and bless everyone for a long, healthy life. And we should be Zoiche to study through the entire Talmud, continuing to do so one page, one line at a time. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.
And for me, I have much nachas from the class. So, shakar.
Have a wonderful day.
I use the one brain cell I have left.
Rabbi, I've been coming to your shul honestly for like 15 years already. It's amazing.
Baruch Hashem. I hope you'll keep on coming. Gesundheit and Freudigkeit. Now, I will say I've been coming to shul before I lived here because I had some connection to the area even before I lived here. I had some relatives here.
Nice.
But you actually grew up here, right? In Florida?
Yeah. No, I grew up here, and my father was founded the shul and was the rabbi of the shul when I moved here, and he's still the rabbi, the founder. Anyways, have a wonderful day, Yasher Koyach, everyone, and looking forward to continuing tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah,